He had spent 15 years behind bars trying to change the man he used to be. Marcus Dalton wasn't perfect. He'd made mistakes, led a life on the edge, and paid the price. But inside prison walls, he found a kind of peace. He studied scripture. He kept to himself. He held on to one thing that made life worth living: Angela, his wife, his best friend, his only real connection to the outside world. For years, she stood by him, visiting faithfully, writing letters full of hope, never once wavering in her loyalty. At least, that's what he believed. Until the day she came to see him and never walked out. The prison claimed it was a violent outburst, that Marcus killed the one person who ever loved him. But why did the surveillance cameras mysteriously go dark right before it happened? Why was Warden Bradley Knox, the same man Angela had reportedly been meeting behind closed doors, in the restricted wing just minutes before her death? And why did so many officers suddenly stop talking? What really happened in that room? Did Marcus snap, or was he set up? And if this was revenge, who had been planning it for all these years? Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Marcus Dalton had already spent 15 years behind bars when the rumors began. Quiet, unsettling whispers that snaked their way through prison walls. At 41, he wasn't the man he used to be. Once a feared gang enforcer, now he spent most days in quiet reflection, reading scripture, writing letters, sketching his son's face from memory. The violence had been stripped out of him, or so everyone thought, but no one could explain what happened next. His wife, Angela, had always been his anchor, loyal, devoted. For years, she'd made the drive every weekend without fail. Rain, snow, gas prices be damned. She brought home-cooked meals during special visits. She smiled through the glass, whispered promises of a future after parole. But lately, she'd been visiting more often than usual, 3 times in 1 week, then again without calling. Marcus didn't ask why, but maybe he should have, because one of those visits changed everything. Why did Angela come so often, uninvited? What was she hiding? Why did the prison's cameras mysteriously stop recording just before her final visit? Why were the correctional officers unusually silent after what happened? There's talk that Marcus snapped, that the old rage inside him, buried for years, resurfaced. But there's another story, less public, harder to trace, a story involving Warden Bradley Knox. He was everything the inmates feared, authoritative, sharp, almost too polished. He knew every face, every file, yet somehow he kept his private life off the radar. That's what made him dangerous. Could it be true that Angela and Warden Knox were seen alone, late at night, in the administrative wing? Was it a misunderstanding, or something deeper? Were the guards covering up for their boss, or were they hiding something even worse? Why would a loyal wife suddenly end up at the center of a brutal prison murder? Did Marcus kill her out of rage or betrayal? Or was he framed again by a system that had already stolen half his life? Why did Angela betray him? Was Marcus the real killer? Or was this revenge, years in the making? Marcus Dalton was born in the heart of Detroit, in a neighborhood where opportunity felt more like a myth than a reality. His mother worked double shifts at a nursing home, and his father, well, he wasn't around long enough to be remembered. By 12, Marcus had learned how to fight. By 16, he'd been arrested twice. And by 20, he was fully immersed in a gang that promised brotherhood, but delivered nothing but prison sentences and funerals. But things shifted the day he met Angela. It was during a court-mandated probation meeting. Angela was the social worker assigned to his case, young, optimistic, the kind of woman who still believed people could change. Marcus thought she was too soft for the world he came from, but she saw through his hardened shell. Week by week she challenged him, encouraged him, believed in him, and somehow, between tense meetings and second chances, they fell in love. When Marcus was arrested for armed robbery, he expected her to walk away like everyone else had, but Angela didn't. She showed up to every court hearing, sat silently behind his defense attorney, and told the judge through tears that she believed Marcus could still turn his life around. Her words didn't sway the sentence, 15 years without parole, but they did something more permanent. They anchored Marcus to something real. The wedding came later, through a prison ceremony over a glass barrier and a shaky landline phone. They both wore white. She smiled through the fear. He promised her, "This place will never change who I am to you." And for years he kept that promise. Angela kept coming. Every holiday, every birthday. She never missed a visit. She sent books, poems, and notes folded neatly inside envelopes that smelled like vanilla and home. She was Marcus's world beyond the walls. But outside the prison, something had started to shift. At first it was subtle. Angela began dressing differently, more polished, more expensive. She stopped answering Marcus's letters right away. When they spoke on the phone, her voice felt distant, like she was somewhere else entirely. And then the whispers began. People in the community started saying Angela was spending a lot of time at the prison, even when she wasn't scheduled to visit Marcus. She had private meetings with Warden Bradley Knox. People saw her car parked outside administrative offices late at night. No one said it directly, but everyone was thinking the same thing. Angela was changing. The same woman who once sat on Marcus's twin mattress writing him love letters was now seen having quiet coffee with a man who ruled the prison like a kingdom. Warden Knox wasn't just any official. He was powerful, respected, feared. And unlike Marcus, he had the freedom to offer Angela something different, something she may have stopped waiting for. Marcus could sense it. He didn't want to believe it, but the signs were undeniable. Her letters stopped coming altogether. Her visits slowed. And then, her phone calls ended. The only voice Marcus heard after that was Warden Knox's. The man Angela had once promised to love forever was now alone, staring at a concrete ceiling, wondering who she really was, and how long she'd been lying. How would you feel if the one person you trusted most, your wife, suddenly went silent, while the man in charge of your fate became the only one speaking to you? Would you break down? Would you fight back? Or would you start to question whether you ever knew her at all? It was a Thursday morning. Quiet, ordinary, at least by prison standards. Breakfast had come and gone. The air was heavy, still. Marcus Dalton was called to the warden's office for what was described as a special parole review. It was unusual. He hadn't submitted a request, and there had been no formal notice. Still, when the guards came, he didn't ask questions. He straightened his collar, tucked in his shirt, and walked the familiar halls, eyes focused forward. But then, just as he passed the visitation room, everything stopped. The door wasn't shut all the way. The lights were dimmed, and through the crack he saw her, Angela, on her knees, her back to the door, and standing behind her was Warden Bradley Knox. No words, just a second of eye contact that broke something deep inside Marcus. His hands shook, his chest tightened, and in that moment, everything he had fought to suppress for the last 15 years came flooding back. Marcus charged forward. The door burst open, shouting, scrambling. Angela screamed. The warden reached for something, maybe a weapon, maybe not. What happened next moved too fast to process. Fists flew, guards rushed in, chaos erupted. Marcus doesn't remember how the gun entered the room, but 2 shots rang out. Then silence, blood on the floor. Bradley Knox collapsed instantly, dead before he hit the tiles. Angela, gasping for breath, reached for Marcus's hand. She tried to say something, but her voice was gone. She died moments later, cradled by the same man she had once promised forever. When the dust settled, Marcus was on his knees, covered in blood, whispering the same sentence over and over. He was raping my wife. He was raping my wife. The initial report was swift and damning. Local news ran the headline, "Inmate kills wife and warden in visitation room rage. Case closed. A jealous ex-con loses control. Another tragedy behind bars." But the truth rarely fits so neatly into a headline, and behind that explosive moment was a trail of secrets no one had been willing to investigate. Until now. Because when detectives reviewed the surveillance footage, what they discovered flipped everything upside down. As the blood was mopped off the visitation room floor and the prison tried to return to routine, a pair of homicide detectives from the State Department were already asking questions the internal report failed to answer. Something about the way it all unfolded didn't sit right. The timeline was tight, the motive too clean. So they requested the surveillance footage. At first, corrections hesitated. They claimed the cameras had gone dark, that technical issues corrupted the feed. But one angle remained intact, a hallway shot just outside the visitation room. What it showed changed everything. Angela had arrived early, 15 minutes before Marcus was ever scheduled to leave his cell. She walked into the visitation room alone. No escort. She looked calm, composed. Then, without hesitation, she turned and locked the door from the inside. There was no panic, no fear, no signs of force. She wasn't lured. She walked in, willingly. That detail blew open the case. If Angela wasn't there against her will, then what was the real reason Marcus reacted the way he did? And why had the prison buried that clip? Investigators started retracing Angela's steps outside the prison, her phone records, emails, bank statements. And that's when they found the letters, dozens of them, hidden in a drawer beneath a stack of old utility bills, all addressed from Marcus, all unopened. And one of them was a formal parole appeal, signed, stamped, never submitted. Angela had intercepted it. She'd told Marcus the appeal had been denied, but the truth was, she never sent it. The question was, why? Why would a woman so devoted for years sabotage the one chance her husband had to go free? The answer, it turns out, wasn't about Marcus at all. The warden, Bradley Knox, had secrets of his own. He'd kept a pristine public image, military background, family man, respected administrator. But behind closed doors, rumors had circulated for years about late-night counseling sessions with inmates' wives, about favors granted in exchange for silence. After his death, 3 other inmates filed official harassment complaints, each one alleging that their wives or girlfriends had been targeted by Knox. Each one told nearly the same story: manipulation, pressure, control. Angela, it seemed, wasn't the only one, but her story went deeper. Because tucked inside Angela's purse, investigators discovered something the prison had missed. A second phone, hidden, locked, encrypted. And what it contained pointed to something far darker than anyone expected. It was the phone no one was supposed to find, tucked beneath loose cosmetics in the lining of Angela Dalton's purse, unlisted, encrypted, and locked behind a password that took investigators days to crack. When they finally accessed it, what they uncovered was not just evidence, it was a confession, a truth that rewrote everything. Inside there was a single folder, labeled in lowercase, almost like a whisper, insurance. 3 audio recordings, dated, time-stamped, each one matching up with Angela's final visits to the prison. At first, detectives assumed it was just phone call logs, but what played through those speakers was something no one was prepared to hear. It was Angela's voice, shaky, uncertain, but still calm. Then another voice entered, firm, deep, cold, Warden Bradley Knox. "You know he won't get out unless I say so," he said. "Keep showing up, keep doing what I ask, or Marcus never sees sunlight again." There was no misunderstanding it. This wasn't flirtation, this wasn't some secret romance. It was leverage, blackmail. The warden had known how much Angela loved Marcus, how desperate she was to keep his hope alive, and he used it against her. "You want him out?" Knox said. "Then do what I say, or he rots here until he dies." In another recording, shorter and more intense, Angela's voice breaks. She says, "I'm done. I can't do this anymore." Knox's reply is immediate, emotionless. "Then he stays right here, for life. I can make sure of it." You could hear the chair scrape against the floor. Something hits the desk, the air shifts, and then silence. Not the kind that ends a conversation, but the kind that warns something worse is coming. That final clip, Angela's last words recorded, was taken just hours before her death. In it, she sounded different, determined, not afraid, not pleading. Ready. Her voice shakes, yes, but it carries strength. "This is the last time," she says. "You don't get to threaten me anymore." Knox doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't have to. "That's not how this works," he tells her. "You think I don't know who you really are? I own every day he's ever going to live." Then a bang, muffled movement, then silence again. Just seconds later, Marcus walked into the room. What he saw, Angela on her knees, Knox standing behind her, wasn't a betrayal. It wasn't a secret exposed. It was a confrontation. A woman standing her ground. A woman who had been suffering in silence to protect the man she loved from the man who owned his fate. Angela wasn't cheating. She hadn't stopped loving Marcus. In fact, she had sacrificed more than he could imagine to keep him alive, to keep his spirit from breaking. She walked into that room not to hide anything, but to end something, for good. She locked that door because she didn't want anyone interfering. She knew it was dangerous. She knew Knox wouldn't go quietly, but she went anyway. For Marcus, and he, tragically, walked in at the worst possible moment. From his perspective, what he saw looked like betrayal, intimacy, deceit. But what he didn't know was that Angela had been keeping a monster at bay, alone. And when he reacted, when violence broke out, the lines between guilt and innocence blurred in a way that would never fully be untangled. Angela's recordings changed everything. The case was reopened. The public narrative shifted. Suddenly, Marcus wasn't just a violent inmate with a jealous temper. He was a man unknowingly caught in a war he didn't even know was being fought. Angela had tried to protect him, but the truth got to him too late. And now, all that was left was silence, grief, and a story that no one saw coming. So we ask you now, how would you have reacted in that moment? If the one person you loved most was suffering in secret, would you have noticed? Would you have listened closer? Would you have been able to see the truth in time, or would it have been too late for you to? The trial began under a cloud of scandal, violence, and tragedy. The headlines were damning. Inmate kills prison warden and wife in visitation room. To the public it seemed open and shut, but inside that courtroom the truth, layer by layer, was beginning to unfold. And what it revealed was far more complicated than anyone ever imagined. Marcus stood before the court, wearing a suit borrowed from the prison chaplain, hands trembling, eyes hollow. He had spent over a decade behind bars, dreaming of freedom, of Angela, of a life together, and now, in front of 12 strangers, he was fighting for the only thing he had left, his future. The prosecution painted him as a jealous, unstable man who couldn't handle betrayal. They showed still images from the surveillance footage. Angela on her knees, the warden looming behind her, Marcus's face twisted in rage. But then the defense played the full video, not the stills, the full timeline. Angela entered the visitation room 15 minutes before Marcus was even called from his cell. She wasn't dragged, she wasn't coerced, but she locked the door, from the inside. Why? That's when the defense pulled out the bombshell, the phone, hidden in Angela's purse, discovered days after her death. Inside, voicemails, notes, and then recordings. In a trembling voice, Angela documented what had been happening for nearly a year. The warden had cornered her during a visit. It started with a flirtation, then manipulation, and then threats. "You want Marcus to get out? Then you better keep showing up. You know I can bury that appeal file. You know he's not going anywhere unless I say so." Angela was being blackmailed, held emotionally hostage by the very man in charge of Marcus's fate. She wasn't having an affair. She was making a sacrifice. When the jury heard her voice, raw, desperate, terrified, everything changed. You could feel the air shift in the room. Reporters stopped typing. Jurors exchanged glances. Even the prosecutor's expression softened. Marcus hadn't brought a weapon that day. The gun used in the shooting? It belonged to Warden Knox, his standard-issue firearm holstered beneath his suit. Investigators confirmed Marcus didn't touch it until the altercation. Ballistics matched the warden's own gun to both injuries. In that moment, the story stopped being about revenge. It became a story about survival, about a man walking into a nightmare he didn't understand, until it was too late. In the end, the jury found Marcus not guilty of first-degree murder, but they didn't let him walk away untouched. He was convicted of manslaughter, a charge that reflected the tragedy, the pain, the irreversible consequences, but also acknowledged the circumstances, the abuse of power, the coercion, the love, and the loss. The judge, in a rare moment of vulnerability, said, "This case has no winners, only scars." Marcus was sentenced to 2 additional years, time he served quietly, without incident. No fights, no appeals, just silence, reflection, grief. And then he walked out. A free man. But freedom didn't feel like victory. The woman who had stood by him during his darkest hours, the woman who sacrificed her dignity, her dreams, and ultimately her life, was gone. He waited 12 years for her. She gave up everything to get him out, and when they finally stood face to face, it cost them everything. Now, Marcus lives in the shadows of the life they could have had. He still keeps her photo in his wallet, creased at the corners, faded from time. Sometimes he walks past parks where they used to dream. Other times he finds himself writing letters, with no one left to read them. In the end, their love was real. But the system they were trapped in, even more ruthless. She thought she was saving him, and in a way she did, but she paid the price no one should ever have to pay. So now I ask you, do you believe Marcus deserved to be set free? After everything he'd endured, the manipulation, the betrayal of a system meant to protect, was this justice finally served, or was it vengeance, written in blood? Some say he did what any man would do. Others believe no one should die, no matter the circumstance. But what would you have done in Marcus's shoes? Would you have walked away, or would rage, heartbreak, and years of silent suffering have taken control? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. Because this story, it's not just about Marcus. It's about the choices we all might face when love, power, and justice collide. And if you thought this story was wild, wait till you hear about the inmate who found out his own cellmate was sleeping with his mother while still behind bars. That story, it doesn't just twist. It spirals into something darker than anyone saw coming. So go ahead, like this video, share it with someone who loves true crime, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what's coming next. Because real life, it's far more twisted than fiction.